Just to
switch on the right. Talk. No. Say something. There will be a lag. I mean,
Alright, mic test, mic test.
yeah,
So there is a bit of a lag,
yeah.
but the screen's not showing though. That's the thing.
Yeah.
It's not, but not on YouTube. Only the
No.
sound. Only the sound.
No, 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 no. We are not using that system. We are not using this. No.
Hello, everyone.
Ring the bell.
Okay. Just to...
Just
Good afternoon, everyone. We are just waiting for some to solve some IT problems in regard to the live stream, and we are ready to present. But we are just waiting for some help for the IT team to solve it and start it. So thank you for patience. We expect it to start in some minutes. Thank you so much. thank you everyone for the attention. First of all, I'd like to apologize for the people that is joining us online because they don't have a video at the moment, but they have the audio. And we will try to solve this problem during our presentation. Then we are, in order to save our time here, we are starting the presentation. My name is Captain Adriano. I'm the alternate permanent representative of Brazil at the IMO. I would like to thank everyone who is present here on this Valentine's Day and everyone who joined us online. The purpose of this talk today is to provide an opportunity to debate on a proposal that is the result of a collaborative group efforts, not only a proposal from the co-sponsors of the paper, but much more people for other countries and experts to collaborate in this proposal. And that proposal is designed to guide the process of establishing a governance for the sustainable fuels certification process. Following this presentation, we'll have a time for a Q&A session. For those who are attending online, you can forward your questions or comment via the chat of YouTube, or also later to an email at regulatory@zerocarbonshipping.com. As we can see in our slide, I will say again, regulatory@zerocarbonshipping.com. I'm pleased to introduce Mr. Edwin Pan, who is the chair of the RINA IMO committee, and will share a few words with you. Please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to add my welcome to this workshop, and the word workshop is very important here. While we present the findings and our work, we'd like participation and lots of questions from the members here and online, because it's really important to work together to find a good solution for this certification framework. And I would also like to thank, in addition to all the co-sponsors, in particularly the member states, Brazil, Japan, and Singapore, the NGOs as well, World Shipping Council, EBA, SGMF, and, hang on, I've just lost mine, IPICA, and the Methanol Institute and ICS. We also had quite a lot of support in developing this from the Kingdom of the Netherlands. So many thanks also to Elke, who participated. It really remains for me now just to pass things on to my colleagues at the center, so Franciel Cavalo and Daniel. When we started this certification work, we started from almost a blank, clean slate. There was not very much, and so in the last probably 2 years, Franciel has done a lot of the heavy lifting and has taken it from basically nothing to this proposed framework that you see today. So quite a lot of work has been done, a lot of progress has been made, and the aim, of course, is for, having done all this work, is for this to be an integral part of the net zero framework, but something that just sort of works there quietly in the background. So I'm going to hand over first to Daniel. Oh, no, straight to Franciel. Please.
Hello, good afternoon. So again, thank you all for being here today on a Friday afternoon, Valentine's Day. So thanks. And as Edwin said, the idea is that I will present a little bit what we did and what is included in our proposal, but we are very much welcome to all the questions and answers that you might have, you want to to answer all of them as soon as the much extent as possible for us to move the certification framework forward together with the IMO midterm measures. So beginning here with the objective of our submission, it's to develop an IMO framework to formally recognize the sustainable fuel certification schemes that will certify the marine fuel supply chain, and this will be used to calculate the fuel's greenhouse gas emissions and also their sustainability aspects. And the idea is that this framework provides confidence in the certified emissions reported to the IMO. And we came much from what is in the IMO LCA guidelines, because the LCA guidelines already states that the certification scheme should be recognized by the committee. The list of the recognized schemes should be publicly available, and also there should be a criteria in place to recognize those schemes. So just adding here to what Edwin has already said, it started in ISWG 16. I think it was the first RINA submission, but it became a more concrete proposal during ISWG 17, where we put forward a proposal on how to address the development of specific certification elements. And then MEPC 82 agreed to continue working on this, and member states and international organizations were invited to join this group that will mature this proposal. And so we did. We worked from October to December to further elaborate this proposal. And in the figure here, you can see the official co-sponsors in the gray circle, but we are also thanking a lot the other member states that participated in the group and contributed a lot to the submission that we put forward. So why are we proposing this now, and why do we propose this to be in parallel with the development of the midterm measures? In our view, it should be developed together with the development of the midterm measures. We recognize that a lot is going on during the midterm measures negotiations, but the idea here is that by the time that those measures enter into force, we have to be capable of certifying fuels according to the IMO guidelines and other specific guidance. And this is how we see that those work streams can happen together until the midterm measures enter into force. And just a quick note here, in this timeline, we are assuming that the midterm measures will enter into force in 2027. We understand this is still under debate, but of course, if this date is changed, the idea is that the development of the certification framework change together to keep the same pace as the development of the IMO midterm measures. And another set of reasons why. So the idea here is that the organization create a robust framework, and this framework should provide confidence in the sustainability and the emissions of the fuels that are reported to the organization, and that will count for the measures that are to be agreed soon. And it also means that the shipping companies can buy fuels worldwide with confidence. It means the operationalization of the LCA guidelines and by a consistent application, and also attaching to the sustainability criteria defined there. And it would also avoid that member states engage in bilateral mutual recognition negotiations. So we know that the shipping industry have vast experience with the ship's verification, but not exactly on the fuel upstream production certification. So in the current practices, what we have is that the fuel supplier sells the fuels for the ships together with a bunker delivery note, and the entire ship activity and documentation is verified by the administrations or by the recognized organization. But what is new to the shipping industry, and what we are proposing here is the certification of the fuels supply chain. So, and the activities under this certification of the marine fuel supply chain should come together with some type of documentation that can prove the adherence of this fuel production with the regulator, in this case, IMO criteria. Before I dig in our proposal with more details, I'd like to just make some comparisons here. Submissions are coming up at the IMO docs, and we noticed other proposals on the GFI verification and certification. And before I dig in what we are proposing, I just want to highlight that we could identify a lot of similarities between both proposals. So specifically, I'm pointing to the Chinese proposal on document 18222, where they propose a structure for the verification framework within the scope of the IMO Net Zero framework. And there they propose the structure of the certification and verification activities for the attained annual GFI, greenhouse gas fuel intensity. And there they say that under the tank-to-wake, the emissions on board ships should be verified and certified by the administrations. And on the upstream part, the well-to-tank emissions and activities should be certified by third parties verification or certification bodies or auditors. And they also pose some links between the certification and verification activities with the fuel life cycle label according to the IMO LCA guidelines. And here I won't go into the text with a lot of details, but for example, in the ISWG 18222 paragraphs 14, 15, and 18, we can see a lot of convergence between both proposals, where they say that certification scheme should provide the methods and procedures for the certification of relevant emission parameters and sustainability aspects of the fuels according to the LCA guidelines, and that this information should be transmitted through the fuel life cycle label. They also say that the certification schemes should comply with relevant criteria predetermined by the IMO, and that the process for recognition of such schemes should be done by the member states for the IMO to establish a reviewing process. And finally, they also say that the IMO should consider establishing a mutual recognition mechanism for different schemes, and this is also something that we included in our proposal. So, doing a first connection, according to our view, how the GFI values connect to the certification, how the link between those exists. So under the current possible draft amendments to the MARPOL Annex 6 on the IMO Net Zero framework, we have a regulation that states how to calculate the attained annual greenhouse gas fuel intensity, the attained GFI. There we can see that are two options under discussions, one based on the full well-to-wake, another in an adjusted tank-to-wake that take into account the well-to-wake emission factors. But the point here is not comparing the both options. The point here is that either way, emission factors will need to be certified. So, and also according to the IMO LCA guidelines, there is the idea of having a fuel life cycle label, which is a technical tool to collect and compile the information that is relevant for the life cycle assessment of marine fuels and also for the energy carriers. And we can see that the fuel life cycle label has a lot of parts, but the idea is that the certification will ensure that the information that is in the fuel life cycle label is accurately transmitted. Right, so the idea is that to ensure that the information on the fuel life cycle label is robust and reliable. And this is how the certification connects, because also the information and the emission factors that are inside of the fuel life cycle label will be used to calculate the attained GFI. So this is how we see the link. And just exploring a little bit more about those aspects. To calculate the attained GFI, we will need the emission factors on the well-to-tank, on the upstream activities of fuel production, and in the tank-to-wake activities. Our sustainable marine fuel certification framework proposal aims to cover the well-to-tank part of this. And these kind of certification activities will help to ensure that the information that is included in the parts A, B, and E of the fuel life cycle label is accurate, while the verification activities will be mostly in charge of the emissions on board and will fill in the part C of the fuel life cycle label. And taking together the part A and also the part C, we have the part D, which is the well-to-wake emission factors. And then we will have a complete fuel life cycle label. And as we see it, the fuel life cycle label will be verified by the administrations or the recognized organizations, and the information in the fuel life cycle label will be used to calculate the attained GFI. So now, finally going into more details about our paper and our proposal. So what we are proposing is like this fuel certification framework structure. Just a second. Waiting for my screen to come back. Oh, I think it came back. Okay. So, as I said, what we are trying to propose is like the framework structure that sets the relationship between the different entities working on this certification process. So basically what we have here is the authority, the regulator, in our case the IMO, that will set the certification framework and will recognize the certification schemes. Those certification schemes or standards. I'm using here the same terminology as the LCA guidelines, because in the LCA guidelines we have schemes/standards. But every time I talk schemes only, please understand that it relates to the terminology under the LCA guidelines. So the certification schemes will set the more detailed procedures to verify these economic operators. And also set more specific requirements for the fuel to be considered sustainable or compliant with the IMO goals. The certification bodies are the third-party conformity assessment bodies that will issue the documents to the economic operators as a proof of compliance with a given scheme. So basically, they are the auditors. They are the ones that audits the economic operators. The economic operators are the entities that are subject to the audit by the verification bodies, and in this case are the companies involved in the entire fuel production chain. And the accreditation bodies in this framework, they have the role to ensure that the certification bodies are qualified and competent to perform the specific activity, in this case, the audits. So they just ensure that they operate in accordance with specified international standards, that they maintain competence and follow established procedures. And how are we proposing to develop this framework? So a regulatory framework is needed for the certification process, and in our case here, this regulatory framework will be based on regulations and guidelines to be developed and adopted by the IMO that will especially define the recognition process and the reporting activities. And so this is how we see how this certification framework could be implemented. And the idea is to have a clear organizational structure that should be implemented by concise regulatory text under MARPOL Annex 6, and also with supporting guidelines to be adopted following the regular IMO procedure. And the idea here is to these regulations and guidelines sets the basic technical criteria to recognize those schemes or standards, that it sets the procedures for the recognition, that they set the procedures for periodic update and review, and also supporting guidelines to complement with all detailed information needed for this process of applying, reporting, and renewing the certification schemes. So under the framework that we are proposing, we understand that some new regulations and guidelines are needed. And in our proposal, we have 3 new regulations and also 3 supporting guidelines for each one of these regulations. But we also recognize that existing regulatory text needs to be updated to include more information and take into account in somehow these certification activities and process that will be needed. I won't go into details of the text here, but just to show more the structure of what is new, what is existing, and how do we see what we propose fitting in this certification framework. So as I said, we are proposing 3 new sets of regulation under MARPOL Annex 6, Chapter 5. The first regulation outlines the recognition of the sustainable fuel certification schemes, and here I'm using the acronym as in the diagram before. And IMO SFCS represents the schemes or standards that are recognized by the IMO. So the idea is that the first regulation outlines the recognition process and also specifies the criteria for those schemes or standards to be recognized by the IMO. The second regulation outlines more the procedural activities for those schemes to be reviewed and recognized, and also provides some guidance on how the organization will communicate about this review process. And the third regulation describes the periodic review, the reporting, and renewal process for the IMO Sustainable Fuel Certification Schemes. Going into more details on the regulation, on the first regulation that we call X1, the idea is to outline the recognition of those schemes to assess the greenhouse gas intensity and also the sustainability performance of marine fuels. And we wanted to propose in our submission that these IMO Sustainable Fuel Certification Schemes comprise national or multinational frameworks and also commercial or voluntary certification schemes and standards. And the idea is that the IMO establish and maintain a public register of the recognized schemes, which we call the IMO Sustainable Fuel Certification Register, or IMO SFCR. And also this regulation specifies criteria for these schemes to be included in the IMO registry. And the idea of having these criteria into the regulation X1 is to ensure consistency, transparency, and credibility in assessing the greenhouse gas intensity and sustainability performance of marine fuels. And this regulation is complemented or supported, I think supported is a better word, by one proposed guidelines, that is the guidelines on criteria and procedures for the recognition of certification schemes / standards. As I said, the first regulation comes together with a set of criteria. So the first criteria for assessing those schemes is to implement a rigorous and structured system for assessing fuels' life cycle greenhouse gas emissions. The second one is to apply the LCA guidelines adopted by the organization. The third is to demonstrate that certification bodies and accreditation bodies operate in accordance with international standards. The fourth is to establish and maintain a robust governance structure and with a mean to promote impartiality and integrity. The criteria number 5 is to incorporate independent third-party audits. 6, that they should demonstrate technical expertise and capacity to provide ongoing training to ensure the maintenance and also the maintenance of the verification standards, and also establish procedures for mutual acceptance of other recognized IMO sustainable fuel certification schemes. So the Regulation 2 outlines the procedure for the organization to review and recognize the given schemes. And the idea is that to apply for recognition, a sustainable fuel certification scheme should do an electronic application through a member state. The application will be reviewed by the organization to check if the scheme satisfies the criteria identified in the Appendix X1, the criteria that I just presented to you, and that it is also consistent with the IMO LCA guidelines, and also sets some some guidance on how the submissions should be reviewed according to the procedures established by the organization. And as in the regulation, in the first regulation, this second regulation will be supported by guidelines on the application procedures and continuous review of certification schemes and standards. So here, just to outline how the procedure goes, so a certification scheme that wants to be recognized by the IMO will submit an application to the committee via a member state. This application will undergo a review process by the organization, where the outcome of this review will be communicated back to the committee for final decision. So, and in the case this scheme or standard is approved, it starts to be an IMO SFCS, or a recognized sustainable fuel certification scheme. And the final regulation is Regulation X3, that sets the periodic review, reporting, and renewal process for the IMO SFCS. And the idea here is just is that the certification schemes report annually to the organization in a compiled report format that will be decided upon. And the idea here is to keep relatively simple process. We don't want to include a lot of administrative burden to the organization. And the idea with these reports is to ensure the robustness of the system. It will also enable to follow the marine fuel production process through the production supply chain. Also, it will be useful to identify missing or incomplete information. And finally, it will reduce the risk of fraudulent certification. And the periodic review also aims to assess whether those recognized schemes continue satisfying the criteria set by the organization, and also if they satisfy the annual reporting obligations. And as in the regulations before, this third regulation is also supported by a proposed guidelines, which is the guideline on the reporting of certification activities to the organization by the certification schemes. So those were the new set of regulations that we believe that are needed, but we also understand that we need to amend some existing regulations to accommodate for the certification framework. And here we are proposing some amendments to the Regulation 2 to introduce new terms under the proposed IMO Sustainable Fuel Certification Framework under these regulations. So I won't go specifically into the text of the definitions, but we are proposing definitions for the IMO Sustainable Fuel Certification Schemes or standards, the accreditation bodies, certification bodies, and economic operators. And here just a compiled format of all the proposed new guidelines, as I said before, that complements the regulations X1, X2, and X3. And yeah, it's just the guidelines to support the requirements and procedures for the recognition of certification schemes, guidelines on the application procedures, and also guidelines on the reporting activities to the organization. I'm going to the end of my presentation. So what is important to understand here from our perspective is that the certification enables the compliance with the greenhouse gas emissions regulations. We understand that the lower emission fuels and energy sources are the building blocks of the shipping energy transition. And we also understand that a regulatory framework is needed to certify those fuels with confidence. So it will provide confidence in what is being reported to the organization, but it would also represent business opportunities for these new fuel pathways. And also understanding that the certification of marine fuels will be crucial, despite of the final structure of the IMO net zero framework. So it's beyond of the final design that is to be agreed upon. We will need the certification either way. So for the next steps, our goals here with this proposal is to approve the draft regulatory text by MEPC 83, also amend the regulation 2 with the new definitions by MEPC 83, and start developing those guidelines specified in the submission as soon as possible, therefore proceeding with the development of the Sustainable Fuel Certification Framework. That's it. With this, I finish my presentation. I think this email is here if you want to send questions, but I think the YouTube is also a possibility. So happy to take some questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very helpful. And first of all, I want to thank everybody who contributed to this submission for the good work. I think it is very essential that this work is conducted. Whatever we are going to decide upon on the measures, if we don't set up this certification framework, we'll have problems in implementing it. So very helpful, and I think what I've seen so far and what I've read and what I understood from Elke, our expert on this, it is moving in the right direction. So I think it's going to be an important submission which we really thoroughly need to consider. I've still got some questions, more clarification, so that I really understand how this is working. First of all, on the process of certifying the sustainability fuel certification schemes. So if I understand it correctly, there will be set up procedures with criteria, which you explained, and then an independent body established by IMO. Is that the SFCR will apply this like the way we do it with GAZAMP and the ballast water treatment equipment, and there will be an let's say an advice going to MEPC for the final agreement on that? Is that the process? Should we see it like that? So that is more or less my first question. And the second question is on the accessibility of data. So if there's review, there's in your submission some words spent on data collection in relation to the review. And there's also a paragraph, and I think you said it also in your presentation, that data should be available to allow every player to have access to any element of the production process so they can see what's happening there. That sounds great, but I also see that there might be some difficulties in setting that up. That's quite an extensive process, but maybe you can explain a little bit more what you meant by that. And my third question is on the review process. Is there a period? Is it every 3 years, every 5 years? Maybe it's in the submission, but then I missed it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions, and also I would like to thank you, Elke, for the engagement with the group. It has been very, very helpful. So I'll answer the questions here, but we have a lot of co-sponsors in this paper. So if any one of my colleagues here, Edwin, Daniel, or people from the NGOs or member states that co-sponsor this document, if you'd like to answer or include any additional information, please do it. So about the review process, we have not defined it and specified the format that it will happen. We let it open for the committee to decide. But when we were drafting the submission, we got this in mind, the GESAMP working group that reviewed the ballast water and reports back to the committee. So we didn't want to put a suggestion at that moment because we need this framework firstly to be agreed, but the idea is to use common procedures already in place in the IMO, not to create something or a new type of reviewing group. So the idea is just to use what IMO is currently used to. On your second question on data available, the idea is to have this IMO SFCR, which is the registry that will have a list of the schemes that are recognized by the IMO, and also these reports that the certification schemes do to the organization. I'm not sure whether we specified it should be public or not, but we took a lot of inspiration for what happens under CORSIA, for example, where you have like an Excel sheet and you have to just fill in some specific information. So which economic operators are certified, the batches of the fuels, who is the certification body that audited that economic operator, and so on. I'm not sure how is it public, how we propose it to be public or not. It's something that we can discuss, but yeah, I think this is mostly how we see this reporting going. I think I answered all your questions. There is anyone? Okay, thank you.
And just to complement, I think the idea in the SFCR is that the names of the schemes that are recognized by the IMO will be publicly available. The extent to which the data that is submitted is to be publicly available, I think that's the point that is to be discussed. But if you look into the ICAO and how it happens there, I think the list of information is not extensive, and it's something that certification schemes are already doing and used to doing. So, and nevertheless, I think if you go to the websites of the certification schemes that are either recognized by the EU for the RED or recognized by the CORSIA for ICAO, they already in their own website for transparency purpose, they publish what they're doing, the activities and so on. So it shouldn't, it's not so deviating so much from current practice of certification schemes in itself.
More questions? It cannot be the only question. It was so clear.
Yeah, Germany, please. And then I see some questions online, and I'll read them out loud after Germany. Thank you.
Thank you. I was just curious, if there is a case that their certificate has been issued, falsely issued, what if, would then the next time the renewal not be, wouldn't there be a renewal? Have you been thinking about the process? What if there's a breach? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. You are asking in the case of, you have any, you want to investigate some certificates or some reporting data, is that it?
Or if it has been detected that there is a certificate that shouldn't have been issued.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, we didn't went into these very detailed procedures, but the idea is that under those guidelines, we will have some guidance on how the organization will investigate and try to collect some information to track back in the fuel supply chain and in the certificate issuance to see if there's any error or fraud or anything else. But we were not so specific at this level of drafting what would be the conduct from the organization side. But the idea is that in the guidelines that we are proposing, it will be included in somehow.
Just to add to that, I mean, there are really two levels of issues that we might consider here. So if a certificate is issued in error, then that is something that you need to take up directly for that certificate, and particularly for that provider. It doesn't mean that it's invalidated the entire scheme, because the schemes ultimately still needs to meet all the criteria that is in there. But within the operation of the scheme, for sure, sometimes errors creep in something. So I think just bear in mind, I don't think we necessarily say that you go straight to an IMO process, but I think there is a scheme process that you need to deal with first. Thank you.
And I'll read the question from Fernanda online. Can you please elaborate a bit on how would you integrate in the proposed framework the element of geographic particularities of biofuel production that was proposed by SWG GEG 17/4/1? Do you have any insights there?
I'm not so familiar with this submission and specific on requirements for the biofuels, but what we are proposing here is just the structure, right? It's like the architecture, how the system will work, how they will apply, how it will be reviewed, and how they will report. More detailed, specific information about how the biofuel should be certified and so on will be in guidelines or even more in the IMO, LCA guidelines and sustainability criteria when we have more guidance on how those should be assessed from the IMO requirements. I think it's it. If my colleagues want to complement, please.
Yeah, I tried to go through, but taking it like immediately like that and go through the paper is very challenging. But I think there's some. I mean, just to complement what Francielle said, I think there's some. What we're trying to address is the framework, the structure, the architecture of having a framework that a process by which fuels are certified, and that there's a unique process to get recognition, sustainability certification schemes. There are some issues related to how sustainable fuels are, the full factors that are complementing or in relation to the LCA guidelines that would need to be discussed as well. But maybe it's another step to be taken in the future beyond the architecture that we're doing here today. But happy to. I mean, what I will do is that I look into that paper and see and reflect on it. But thanks for the question. Yes, the Netherlands again.
Yeah. I'll just give it a try. Another one. Just like Germany said. Well, I was just thinking about what she said about when things are not going. So, and then Edwin answered, it's part of the scheme that it let's say corrects itself when it starts to produce wrongly certified fuel, and I understand. But you could also imagine a situation which that is not enough, and we come to the conclusion that the certification scheme as such is not complying with the criteria. Did you envisage how that then would work? Is then because who's going to make the decision? Is that MEPC eventually was going to make the decision to withdraw that certification scheme from the register, or is there already the, let's say, authority to the I forgot the abbreviation, but let's say the SFCR. So could you elaborate a little bit about that? Thanks.
I try to answer this one because nobody else really wants to answer. So, indeed, if the if there is something fundamentally wrong with the scheme itself, and in the periodic audit you find that it no longer meets the criteria, then there's a process there that either they need to correct the non-conformity, let's say, or they are taken off the list. What we probably want to emphasize is that a lot of this detail about how this audit takes place and what is the threshold for certain actions being taken needs to be defined in the guidelines. And perhaps the question that we might have to back to you is, do we have enough regulatory text here that allows us to do that? So is it strong? Is the regulatory text strong enough that if we wrote some guidelines that cover that area, that we're able to implement it in that way?
Just to add, because the concern here is we have MSAS audits, which also comes with recommendations to flags and administrations. And if you ask the IMO, what's the follow-up to that? It's quite low. So if it comes to this kind of processes, we have some let's say, experience as IMO that it's quite difficult to have a check and balance system like that. We can do the audits, we can understand what's going wrong, but the follow-up process always is quite difficult. And I think we really need to look into that because eventually that's the big stick, or let's say the thing which at least I think is essential to make sure that certification schemes keep on complying with the criteria.
Do I hear that the Netherlands are formally volunteering to help with the drafting of the guidelines?
We'll see. I'll ask Elke. No.
And actually, this is an important thing to note. So we will this regulatory text will be presented next week and for discussion and so on, and we hope to then commence work or continue work, in fact, on these 3 guidelines. In the same way, under an informal group, because there's not enough space for another correspondence group coming out of MEPC, and we don't really have any draft text or draft guidelines. So the idea is that we will continue as a group of interested parties to draft these guidelines. So if there are more interested parties who have strong opinions, please join us. The idea is that then we would draft these guidelines and present them likely to MEPC 84. Where at that point, hopefully, we have a bit more regulatory time to have a correspondence group to finalize them. So just to give you an idea of how this is likely to work. And so then, as David is hinting, quite a lot of work needs to go into these guidelines to make sure that the whole system is robust.
And just to complement, I think there's a Regulation X3, paragraph 3, that we propose that says that it's like there's the review of the SFCS that is every 3, in brackets for now, 3 or 5 years, or earlier, when deemed necessary by the organization. I mean, that's the process of, okay, maybe there's something to be assessed with the scheme, and then it needs to be earlier than the 3-5 years for whatever reasons that should be defined better in the shape of guidelines. So that's the paragraph that would account for the possibility the review process to be automatic, but maybe earlier if there is a need for any reason, and this might be one of those.
Hello. So I'm from Monsucro, a certification scheme, and I actually have a question about that item. When you say that you're going to be conducting this review every 3 or 5 years, what's the scope of this review? So it would be a full review that the certification scheme needs to submit all of the documentation for every review, or could be a reduced scope in case the certification scheme is submitting the reports correctly and there is no issues or no complaints. And I do have another question as well. If you could explain a little bit better what it means that the submission, the application shall be submitted to the committee by a member state.
So for us, we don't understand exactly what that means in this process. If you could explain a little bit better. Thank you.
So on the review, I think you are on paragraph 3 of the third regulation, right? The idea is to just ensure that the scheme continues satisfying the criteria and also the reporting obligations. So for example, after 3 or 5 years, something changes in the IMO LCA guidelines. So this scheme will be reassessed to check if they continue to satisfy these IMO guidelines or other relevant criteria. So the idea is just to ensure consistency with the IMO requirements. And those requirements might change over time, you know, so we have to set a periodic time for the schemes to be reviewed. And about the member states application, I think it follows also common regular procedures under the IMO. So through the MEPC, the Marine Environmental Protection Committee, a member state applies for a scheme, on the behalf of a scheme for recognition. Do you want to add more?
Yes, just a quick one. I think it's a new thing, certification for these organizations, certification fuels, sorry. So I think it's worth explaining that the target of the paper is the regulations. So the regulations that will go in MARPOL, and that goes through a process that is predefined here in the IMO by that any amendment to the regulations in MARPOL needs to be approved, adopted. There's an adoption period, and that takes time. Guidelines, which provides typically more details, they are developed and they don't need to go formally to the same process, so there's more flexibility. So I think the details of the review, the scope of the review, what triggers the review, and how that goes, documentation should be reassessed. It's something that hopefully can be clarified by the guidelines. But the objective of the paper is to have the regulations that provides the robustness so that then the guidelines can supplement this robustness with more details. So this is just, I mean, of course, for most of people here, they understand the process because I've been doing IMO regulations for quite a while, but also certification schemes that are here, and I see others. This is new, so just to clarify that point for clarity for you.
Yeah, and just to say that actually certification schemes don't necessarily have a relationship with the IMO, and which is why we'd say you go through the member state, because in effect the IMO is a group of member states agreeing together. So that's the reason why. Franz, please.
Thank you very much for your presentation. From your presentation, I understand that the same fuel will have two different certification schemes, one for downstream, tank to wake, and one for upstream, well to tank. Will the two certifications have to be attached together for the same fuel delivery for a ship and be the subject of a common declaration? And the second question is, what will be the method used for fuel blends in well to tank? Thank you very much.
Thanks for your question. So what we see is more like a certification process for the upstream production, so up to the fuel supplier. And when the fuel is burned on ships, they regularly already have a specific emission factor and conversion factor. So it's just a matter of ships verifying that this fuel is under this type of engine and this is the emission factor. Okay. Of course, in some cases, some fuels and engine types would like to apply for actual emission factor. So in this case, a more specified verification/certification process on ships on the combustion of fuel should be in place. But what we see here is not like a duplicate, but it's just one thing happens on land, other on the sea, and this is how we see those parallel types of certification/verification. And your second question, I think I forgot, is about the
Fuel.
the blend fuels. Yes, we don't set any guidance on this. I think it sets to the IMO LCA guidelines how those fuel blends would be calculated, and how so the supply chain will be assessed. So it's something it's next steps. So we are just on the first to build the structure, and then we will go more into details about how to go for blends and other important aspects of the fuel production supply chain at a later stage.
Just to say that it's probably not very different from what happens already today. So in the EU, under the Renewable Energy Directive, if you have a blend, you actually only get the proof of sustainability for the bio part, but not the fossil part. So the fossil part has no certification in a way associated with the sustainability aspect because it's a fossil fuel. And there is a default, or let's call it a fixed value, for the both the well-to-tank and the tank-to-wake part of the fossil fuel. But the bio component has this sustainability certification. So the sustainability certification will always be for the bio part or the synthetic, the e-fuel part, but not the fossil part. You may get some situations where the tank-to-wake value is adjusted because of the combustion unit that you use. So, for example, for LNG, you have methane slip, and if you have better technology that has a lower methane slip, for example, then you will have a slightly different tank-to-wake value for the slip, which also would need to be certified. But broadly, those are the elements that we will have.
And making sure that the calculation is correct, it will be maybe role of the verification process of the Attain GFI. So you're going to get an Attain GFI for yearly, and then you're going to have parts of it that have been biofuels and then B30. Then to substantiate 30% of that B30, you're going to get the FLL, and then see if the certification for up to the point of delivery to the ship is done correctly, or you have the documentation, so on, to be specified not only by the guidelines related to the certification, what we are proposing here, but also guidelines that are to be developed to supplement or to support the DGFS or GFI or MSNF, whatever is decided by the organization. This element of verification. So the verifier or recognized organization making sure that all the pieces and documentations are fitting in together, and then they are there. So there's also, we're not covering we're not covering the part of the correspondence group that is reporting to NPC 83 on the non-CO2 emissions, where there is a draft guideline to be for methane slip on board the vessels and so on. So that's a separate part, yeah. Thank you. I have a question online from Tori Longva. How do you anticipate fuel certification working with the defined fuel paths? Will the certification state whether a fuel adheres to a fuel path? If so, there would need to be specific criteria to be met to meet. Sorry. He's complemented the question, Todd. Thank you. For example, e-ammonia from electrolysis, where the electricity may not completely be from renewables.
So I'll start to answer, and then my colleagues can complement me. So I understand that there will be needed some guidance on this, how each fuel pathway should be assessed, but we are not there yet. We foresee this. We will have some specific guidance also attaching to the sustainability criteria set in the IMO LCA guidelines. But as I mentioned before, it's just a first step. We understand this is needed. It's important that we start listing all of these questions that needs to be answered, because once we progress with the development of the certification framework, we will need more and more and more to add on the top of that.
Tour, thank you for the question. I mean, it is actually, it's something that will need to be resolved in the LCA guidelines with some advice from GSAMP, because it is a decision on how you account for electricity grid mix in the production of the fuel. So do you use the average GHG intensity of the grid mix? What happens with certificates of origin? So if you say you buy sustainable energy in order to run your plant to make the e-ammonia, and so the recognition or acceptance of this needs to be agreed within the LCA guidelines. What we are doing here is just a certification scheme that recognizes all the regional, local certification schemes that will then apply the LCA guidelines and do the and accept or check the calculation of the well-to-wake value.
And just to complement again, I think it's very similar to what happens in other regulatory frameworks where, like if you take the case of RED, there was a revision of the regulatory text adding for e-fuels, for instance, RFNBOs in that context. And then, of course, with rules and how those fuels are qualified to be sustainable and so on in a regulatory piece. And then there was a need for certification schemes to be reassessed as being able to certify those fuel pathways as per the rules that are defined, connected to LCA rules and so on and so forth. So also the idea of having the review process as something that happens periodically or triggered by other reasons. And one of the reasons could be that there is updates in the LCA framework, more definitions, more precisions, and then you need to reassess if that continues. I mean, the certification scheme continues to be robust. And I hope that we answered the question from Tore. I don't have any more questions online, but I'll keep an eye. Yeah, the Netherlands again. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I'll make them up while sitting here. No. Just a question of expectation, and hopefully the answer is yes. Otherwise, we have a difficult. But looking at the work at hand, do you think we are going to accomplish to have everything ready for implementation in first quarter of 2027? Yeah, what extra do we do? Of course, we need to write these guidelines. I've already asked Elke to do so, but can you give a little bit more of what we're up to for the coming 2 years? Thanks.
Thanks for your question. So from our side, we don't have a clear expectation. We recognize that it's a lot of work. There are more than 20 guidelines proposed under the IMO Net Zero framework, plus the 3 that we are proposing here. So it's a lot of work to be developed. It will be challenging to develop all of these regulatory texts before 27, but you never know. Yeah, I'm not sure a way forward for this, but we know it will be challenging.
My question is purely on the certification scheme. I know the challenges of the others, but especially for the certification schemes, I think that is a bit of a known for many of us because it's an area we are not quite used to be working in. Are there elements we really have to make sure, types of expertise, things like that, which we need to mobilize? Thanks.
We're looking at each other trying to work out whose crystal ball was more accurate. So let's try and work out the timing. So if, let's say, we submit some guidelines or draft guidelines to MEPC 84, which is in the spring of 2026, then they will go through a process, and then hopefully by MEPC 85 they will be finalized and adopted. So that's the end of 2026. That means that once those guidelines are operational, someone has to propose schemes to go into the system and they have to be assessed and recognized before first quarter 2027, which is tight. So this is already the best case that we, and in some ways I would almost, as we write the guidelines, the countries who are who have operational certification schemes, I would almost urge them to contribute to the guideline writing while bearing in mind also how their certification scheme might already be submitted into the system. Because the only way we get something ready for for Q1 or Q2 2027 is if we can accelerate the guideline, but then the submission and the evaluation, so that at least from the get-go of the midterm measures, you have at least one or more schemes ready.
So building up on existing schemes is then the pathway we also really need to consider, like the ones from ICAO and for which we already have certified under the red. And are there other areas, schemes we have to look into in other parts of the world?
I mean, we're not restricting ourselves. I think there are many nations that have experience with national certifications or regional certification. One of the co-sponsors has RenovaBio as one, and then EU has the RED, and all these provides experience from the do's and don'ts in a way, and to provide some sort of clarity of how the work is ongoing. Actually, we are working the guidelines already, because we have submitted the submission earlier. We continue to work. There has been regular meetings with the group, and thanks for the Netherlands who have been contributing to writing the guidelines actually. So we are already in the process of filling that guidelines as we speak. So we didn't stop the process waiting for the decision. We have to get it going. So I'm personally with optimism to make it happen. So yeah.
Any more questions? I know it's sunny outside and it's Friday. Yeah. And Valentine's Day.
Thank you so much for our final remarks. First of all, once again, I apologize for the people that joined us online, that we have some problems, experienced some problems in the beginning of the presentation. They just have the audio, but after we solve this problem. Thanks for all team of RINA here, Francielli, Dr. Francielli, Edwin, Daniel, and all of other experts that attend, collaborate in this paper, not only the RINA, but also other experts that other countries and organizations. And also thank you to be present here at this wonderful day in London, and those who joined us online. I think that we achieved the purpose of this workshop, that we have the opportunity to deeper in this matter in order to facilitate a decision soon during the IMO meetings, including the next week we continue this. It's one of the topics of this JG. Okay, I pass the floor for the final remarks. No?
Yeah, no, thank you very much for giving up some time on Friday, and we hope for your support next week during the discussions when this paper comes up. It would be great if it goes through quite smoothly, so we save time for all of the other discussions, and then we can go ahead and get started on the guidelines. And as I said earlier, if you would like to contribute, then please get in touch. with us. We very welcome your views and your participation. Thank you.